Hallelujah! White offenders have been saved from being treated in a discriminatory manner in sentencing. As for black offenders who are and have been historically treated in a discriminatory manner in sentencing, well, that can wait. Welcome to racial and religious disparity in the criminal justice system. The Sentencing Council has backed down from its proposed new sentencing guidelines after fierce backlash from certain political and media quarters. Critics called the planned two-tiered justice a system that would treat white offenders worse than minority offenders when it comes to sentencing. But here's the catch, the real issue. Those same critics had little or nothing to say or have done nothing about the decades-long, well-documented racial and religious biases against black and ethnic minority groups in the criminal justice system, and I include CT and Prevent in that. So in this video, I'll be breaking down what the planned but now ditched sentencing guidelines actually said, how the pre-sentence requests and reports are used in practice, not the myths about them, why the critics went on the attack against the Sentencing Council, leading to the Justice Secretary clashing with the Sentencing Council, and what the Sentencing Council's retreat and backing down from putting into force the planned but now ditched sentencing guidelines really says about justice and politics in a racially divided and growing populist Britain today. And if you like this content, don't forget to follow and subscribe for more. And also, this is England, so feel free to comment. So what did the now ditched sentencing guidelines actually say? Well, the Sentencing Council's plan was simple. Before handing down prison or community sentences, when considering a community or custodial sentence, the court must request and consider a pre-sentence report, PSR, before forming an opinion of the sentence, unless it considers that it is unnecessary. PSRs are necessary in all cases that would benefit from an assessment of one or more of the following: the offender's dangerousness and risk of harm, the nature and causes of the offender's behavior, the offender's personal circumstances, and any factors that may be helpful to the court in considering the offender's suitability for different sentences or requirements. As you can read, the PSR relates to any offender of any ethnicity. The now ditched guidance then continues. A pre-sentence report will normally be considered necessary if the offender belongs to one or more of the following cohorts. Which cohorts or groups does the ditched sentencing guidelines refer to? Well, it refers to these: those at risk of first custodial sentence and or at risk of a custodial sentence of 2 years or less, after taking into account any reduction for guilty plea. That's an offender from any ethnicity. A young adult, typically 18 to 25 years, again, that's any offender from any ethnicity. Female, again, that's any offender from any ethnicity. From an ethnic minority, cultural minority, and or faith minority community. Pregnant or postnatal, sole or primary carer for dependent relatives. Or if the court considers that one or more of the following may apply to the offender: has disclosed that they are transgender, has or may have any addiction issues, has or may have a serious chronic medical condition or physical disability or mental ill health, learning disabilities, including developmental disorders and neurodiverse conditions or brain injury damage. Or the court considers that the offender is or there is a risk that they may have been a victim of domestic abuse, physical or sexual abuse, violent or threatening behavior, coercive controlling behavior, economic, psychological, emotional, or any other abuse, modern slavery or trafficking, or coercion, grooming, intimidation, or exploitation. Now, the passage that has really vexed critics of the ditched sentencing guidelines is the section that relates to PSR considers necessary if the offender belongs to one or more of the following cohorts: from an ethnic minority, cultural minority, and or faith minority community. But I hope you can see and read the sentencing guidance applies to any offender being sentenced when considering a community order or sentence. The court must request and consider a PSR before forming an opinion on the sentence. So why did the Sentencing Council include cohorts? Because simply put, they were trying to address historic and endemic racial disparities in sentencing. In response to the criticism, this is what the Sentencing Council said. Any judge or magistrate required to sentence an offender must do all that they can do to avoid a difference in outcome based on ethnicity. The judge will be better equipped to do that if they have as much information as possible about the offender. And to be quite frank, cohort of ethnic, cultural, or faith minority groups may be a cohort about which the judge or magistrates are less well informed about. In short, the reason centered on sentencing judges being in a better position to sentence by understanding the offender's background before sentencing, especially when they come from groups that face systematic disadvantage. Or as the sentencing guidance reads, courts should refer to the Equal Treatment Bench Book for more guidance on how to ensure fair treatment and to avoid disparity of outcomes for different groups. To add further details, when you click into the Equality Treatment Bench Book, the following concerns are expressed about the need for judges to demonstrate fairness in carrying out their responsibilities in order to build confidence in the justice system among all ethnic minority groups. Avoid stereotyping people based on perceived characteristics associated with a particular ethnic minority group. Black people are particularly overrepresented as defendants in the criminal justice and prison estate, whilst being particularly underrepresented in the judiciary. More than half the judiciary are white men, and over a third are white women. People from ethnic minority groups are underrepresented in the judiciary. However, the proportion from black backgrounds has stayed the same at 1%. The Sentencing Council says this about racial disparity in sentencing. There is evidence of a disparity in sentence outcome for supply of drug offences, indicating that a high proportion of Black, Asian and other ethnicity offenders receive an immediate custodial sentence than white offenders, and that for Asian offenders, custodial sentence lengths have on average been longer than for white offenders. So the aim of sentencing guidance, which has now been ditched, wasn't about being soft on sentencing Black people, non-Christian, Jewish and Muslim offenders. It wasn't a free pass to be an easy sentence for Black and ethnic minority offenders. It was about a sentencing judge having the full picture before locking someone up or sentencing for a non-custodial option. And the council made that clear. It said PSRs are not indications of sentence, but background information. And this is not an exhaustive list, and a PSR can still be necessary if the individual does not fall into one of those cohorts. And the question might be asked then is, what are PSRs, pre-sentence report? Let me give you a little bit more background about PSRs. Pre-sentence reports, or PSRs, are compiled by probation officers. They help judges assess the offender's personal circumstances, why the crime happened, the risk of reoffending, what sentence might work best. Believe me, judges aren't bound by PSRs. They are not let off lightly because an offender obtains a PSR. In fact, some PSRs lead to tougher sentences against offenders. Even now, under existing laws, judges should get a PSR before sending someone to prison, unless they think it is unnecessary. But this nuance didn't matter to the critics. They didn't read the first line of the planned sentencing guidance, which has now been ditched, just the list of cohorts. The moment this became public, some Conservative and Reform Party MPs and some media outlets exploded in criticism. They said the guidance would lead to white offenders being harsher sentenced because they weren't on the protected list. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, slammed the sentencing guidelines, now ditched, as blatant bias against Christians and straight white men. He dubbed Starmer two-tier care. And then came Reform UK leader Richard Tice, who went further. Let's legislate to scrap the Sentencing Council. Sentencing must be answerable to the electorate. They wanted judges out and politicians in. But the irony is that many of these critics never really focused on and expanded on what was the reality of the criminal justice system for a very long time, that we already have a two-tier system, one that punishes minority groups more harshly than white offenders. Don't take my word for it. The Lamy Review 2017 found, for example, the finding that within drug offences, the odds of receiving a prison sentence were around 240% higher for BAME offenders is deeply worrying. For 100 white women handed custodial sentences at Crown Court for drug offences, 227 black women were sentenced for custody. For black men, this figure is 141 for every 100 white men. So if you're a critic of the now ditched sentencing guidelines, shouting down those plans and shouting about equality before the law, ask yourself, where is your outrage about historic and current racial and religious biases in the criminal justice system? Now, Shabana Mahmood, Labour's Justice Secretary, quickly stepped in on the back of these criticisms from Conservative MPs. She said, as someone from an ethnic minority background, I do not stand for differential treatment before the law. There will never be a two-tier sentencing approach under my watch. She told the Sentencing Council to revise the guidance. She didn't mince her words. These guidelines create a justice system where outcomes could be influenced by race, culture, or religion. This is unacceptable. And she didn't stop there. When the Sentencing Council resisted, Mahmood threatened to introduce emergency legislation to block it, and that's rare. Overriding the Sentencing Council, almost unheard of. But why was she so firm? She believed in the principle of equal treatment before the law. But let's be honest, in my view, there was also a clear political calculation. Labour is less than 1 year into power after a landslide, but Reform UK is climbing fast in the polls. By early 2025, Reform was polling 25%, nearly level with Labour. Many of their voters were ex-Tories and some were traditional Labour voters, angry about high levels of immigration, crime and so-called wokeness. Labour, in my view, couldn't afford to look soft. So it seemed that Labour did what was politically necessary, shut down any story that suggested Labour favoured minorities over everyone else. Remember how Labour criticised the judge for granting the Palestinian family asylum using the Ukraine route. Meanwhile, Lord Justice William Davies, chair of the Sentencing Council, stood his ground. Well, at first at least. He said any judge or magistrate required to sentence an offender must do all that they can do to avoid difference in outcome based on ethnicity. In short, he was denying the planned sentencing guidelines was about bias or wokeness. The PSR was just a practical tool, not a political statement. And he said the planned sentencing guidelines, which is now ditched, wasn't new. It had been in development for years, following extensive consultation, including with ministers. But when the final wording went public, suddenly it became a political football. The leading black KC, Keir Monteith, commented on the drama and said this: there had been a deliberate misreading of the rules to generate a row. This is an absurd situation where we have politicians on both sides of the house creating an argument out of absolutely nothing. It is not two-tier justice because the starting point of the dropped guidance was everyone should get a pre-sentence report. This story that has been created by Robert Jenrick and then taken up by Mahmood and seemed to coincide with all the noise we are getting from America about two-tier justice. This is what the KC said. And Janie Starling, the co-director of the Gender Justice Campaign Group, Level Up, accused Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, of participating in a populist pantomime with Jenrick. What is truly appalling, she said, is that Mahmood decided to play along in an attempt to win over Conservative and Reform UK voters. So here came the U-turn. By late March, the pressure was too much. With the Justice Secretary preparing a bill to make the guidance unlawful, the Sentencing Council backed down. On March the 31st, the day before the rules were due to come into effect, the Council paused implementation. In summary, the Sentencing Council statement said this: the Council remains of the view that the guideline is necessary and appropriate. However, it will not proceed given the government's position. Game over. The Justice Secretary then thanked the Sentencing Council. Just like that, the Council's long-awaited reform was dead in the water. So what happens now? Where do we go from here? Well, there are two likely options for the Labour government. One, redraft the sentencing guidelines, make them apply broadly without naming groups or cohorts, or simply removing the cohorts. That is the bit about the ethnic minority, cultural minority, and or fake minority community. Or the second option is to shift sentencing control back to Parliament, not the judges. In short, ministers having more power over sentencing. But let's be clear, when judges lose independence over sentencing guidance, like we have seen in such a climate, ignoring decades of long racial and religious discrimination, we enter a very, very dangerous territory. Justice should address historic and current biases. Justice should be written in a fair manner, and justice shouldn't swing with the polls. But for now, I fear it might. But what do you think? Is there a racial and religious bias in the criminal justice system? Do you think the ditch sentencing guidance was a step too far and would have swung the other way against white people? Feel free to comment, subscribe, follow, like and share. Thank you for watching, and as always, may the justice be with you.